If we look at our rapidly changing world, we see that today's and tomorrow's children face unprecedented challenges, personal and ethical challenges, environmental and economic challenges, social and technological challenges. I wrote Tomorrow's Children, a blueprint for partnership education in the 21st century because of my passionate commitment to help develop the kind of education that will enable young people to meet these challenges. If you look at the picture that we get about schools from the popular culture, from television, where young people, students, are moved on a conveyor belt from class to class, from grade to grade, really like a factory, a place where education is something that is done to students rather than with students. We all know that for real learning, young people need to be actively engaged. Many dedicated educators have worked to move us to a more forward-looking education. But their work is still primarily found as add-ons. And add-ons, well, they tend to fall off. Add-ons can also be pushed out. So what we urgently need today is a new integrative framework for education. Partnership education provides this framework. It adds innovative new elements, but it goes much further. Education doesn't happen in a vacuum. It happens in a social and historical context. Just a few hundred years ago, if a child got an education at all, it was for her or his fixed station in life. The emphasis was on rankings, on learning to obey orders, and if that was one station in life, to give them. Canings and other brutal treatment of children were considered normal. The curriculum focused almost exclusively on one half of humanity because it was a much more male-dominated time, with hardly any attention paid to the female half. All this was appropriate for an authoritarian, top-down, rigidly male-dominated society, a society orienting more to a dominator rather than partnership model. This distinction between the partnership and dominator models comes out of my research over 3 decades, multidisciplinary research looking at a large span of our cultural evolution that is reported in part in my book, The Chalice and the Blade. This research addresses fundamental questions that many of us have asked, questions that in my life came out of my experiences as a little girl in Nazi Austria. Questions such as, do we have to hunt and persecute each other? When we humans have such an enormous capacity for caring, for creativity, what is it that has tilted us back? Don't we have any alternatives to this way that is so often presented to us as just the way things are? Out of this research, the answer came, yes, we do have alternatives. But we cannot see these alternatives unless we look at human history through a wider lens. What we begin to see is that societies, whether they're ancient or modern, Eastern or Western, that orient more to the dominator model, we see that the primary principle for organizing relations is ranking. Man over woman, man over man, race over race, nation over nation, man over nature. But as you move more towards the partnership model, you begin to see a different governing principle, linking. There are still hierarchies, there are still very clear lines of responsibility and leadership. But leadership is not based on the power to dominate, to control through fear, through force. It is not disempowering, but empowering. We live in a time when we have technologies not only of communication that span the globe in a matter of minutes, but of destruction that span the globe in a matter of minutes. The mix of high technology and the dominator model is potentially disastrous. Fortunately, there has been movement toward the partnership model. If there hadn't been, we wouldn't be talking about democracy, about human rights, about an education where each child can realize her or his individual potential. But unfortunately, there are still many elements in our education that we have inherited from these earlier times, times when ideas such as democracy, human rights, individual potential were simply unknown. This is why we so urgently need a complete reassessment and, yes, reconfiguration of education today.